I, 32F, have been married to my husband Jake, 35M, for 8 years. When we got married, his parents, Mom 67F Linda, Dad 71M Robert, were still relatively independent and living in their own home about 20 minutes away in a cute little ranch house they'd owned for 30 years. His mom, Linda, was this sweet woman who baked amazing chocolate chip cookies from scratch and always asked about my day with genuine interest. His dad, Robert, was quiet but incredibly kind, always offering to help with yard work when they visited and telling the most ridiculous dad jokes that somehow always made me laugh despite myself. I actually looked forward to seeing them back then. They felt like the warm, loving parents I'd never had growing up. My own parents divorced when I was 12 and both remarried people who tolerated me at best. Family gatherings were tense, awkward affairs where I felt like an outsider. But Jake's family was different. They welcomed me with open arms from day one, included me in their traditions, and made me feel like I truly belonged somewhere. Linda would call just to chat, not because she needed anything. Robert would remember little details about my work projects and ask follow-up questions months later. They felt like the family I'd always dreamed of having. Fast forward to early 2019, Robert had a massive stroke that left him with significant mobility issues on his left side and some cognitive problems that came and went unpredictably. One day he'd be sharp as a tack, cracking jokes and discussing politics. The next he'd be confused about where he was or what year it was. Around the same time, Linda developed severe rheumatoid arthritis that progressed rapidly, making daily tasks incredibly difficult and painful. Simple things like opening jars, buttoning clothes, or climbing stairs became monumental challenges for her. Their financial situation deteriorated quickly. Robert had been working part-time at Home Depot for extra income, but obviously couldn't continue after the stroke. Linda had been doing some bookkeeping work from home, but her arthritis made typing and writing painful. Meanwhile, Robert's medical bills were astronomical. The hospital stay, rehabilitation, ongoing therapy, medications not fully covered by Medicare. Their fixed Social Security income wasn't covering their mortgage anymore, and they were facing foreclosure within 6 months. That's when Jake suggested they move in with us, temporarily, while we figured out a long-term solution. He painted it as a 6-month arrangement, maybe a year at most, just until we could get them into appropriate housing and their finances stabilized. I agreed because I'm not a monster, and they genuinely needed help. These were people I loved, who had shown me more kindness than my own blood relatives. How could I turn my back on them in their darkest hour? That was 5 years and 4 months ago. Our house went from being our sanctuary, the first place I'd ever truly felt at home, to feeling like a nursing home mixed with a daycare center, mixed with a battlefield. The transformation didn't happen overnight, which made it somehow worse. It was this slow, creeping takeover that I didn't fully recognize until I was drowning in it, like the proverbial frog in boiling water. At first, Linda was genuinely grateful and tried to help where she could. She'd fold laundry, though the arthritis meant it took her 3 times as long. She'd attempt to cook simple meals, and she was always thanking us for our kindness. Robert spent most of his time in the guest room watching old westerns on the small TV we'd moved in there, emerging for meals and doctor appointments. It felt manageable, even heartwarming at times. But as months turned into years, and Linda's arthritis worsened while Robert's cognitive issues became more pronounced, that gratitude slowly transformed into resentment and an overwhelming need to control everything around her. I think losing her independence was devastating for her, and controlling our household became her way of feeling useful and important again. She critiques everything I do with the intensity of a food critic reviewing a Michelin-starred restaurant. My cooking is too salty or too bland, never just right. Sarah, honey, this chicken is a little dry. Did you remember to brine it? My mother always said. Or this soup could use more seasoning. Don't be afraid of salt, dear. I don't clean the bathroom properly according to her standards. You miss some spots around the base of the toilet, and you really should clean the mirrors with newspaper for that streak-free shine. I'm spoiling our 6-year-old daughter Emma by letting her watch TV after homework instead of forcing her to read for 2 hours like Linda apparently did with her children. Linda rearranges my kitchen constantly, moving things to places that make more sense but only to her decades-old system that has no logic I can discern. I've found my spice rack reorganized alphabetically at least 24 times. She'll spend an entire afternoon painstakingly moving everything around. Arthritis be damned. When I move things back to where I could actually find them while cooking, she'd huff and sigh dramatically and make passive-aggressive comments about how some people don't appreciate help, and I was just trying to make things easier to find. My coffee mugs got moved to a cabinet I can barely reach without a step stool because Linda decided they'd be safer there. My cooking utensils were relocated to a drawer on the opposite side of the kitchen from the stove because it was more organized. She rearranged my pantry according to some system involving food groups and expiration dates that required a flowchart to navigate. Every time I'd adjust things back to something functional, she'd fix them again within days. The worst part is how she acts like I'm a guest in my own home. No, worse than a guest because at least guests get some courtesy. She schedules repair people without asking me first, then gets offended when I'm not home to let them in because I wasn't informed. She decides what we're having for dinner and starts cooking before I get home from work, using ingredients I'd planned for other meals, then acts hurt when I mention I'd planned something else. She answers my door when friends come over, then stays and inserts herself into every conversation like she's the host and we're all visiting her. My friend Sarah came over one evening after work for what was supposed to be a quick glass of wine and catch-up session. Linda immediately appeared with her own glass and launched into a 45-minute monologue about her various ailments, the inadequacy of her doctors, and her theories about what's wrong with young people today. When Sarah tried to politely steer the conversation back to what we'd been discussing, my work situation, Linda interrupted with, "Oh, Sarah, you should hear about the drama at my doctor's office. You won't believe what this receptionist said to me." Sarah left after an hour, having barely gotten a word in edgewise about anything meaningful. Linda has redecorated our living room twice without permission, saying the furniture was depressing and she was just brightening things up. The first time, she rearranged everything while I was at work and Jake was traveling for business. I came home to find my grandmother's antique side table, the only thing I had left from her, moved to the basement because it didn't fit the flow of the room. When I brought it back upstairs, Linda spent 3 days making pointed comments about how the room looked cluttered now and how some people don't have an eye for decorating. The second redecorating incident happened about a year later. I came home to find she'd convinced Jake to help her move our sectional sofa to a completely different configuration, bought new throw pillows and curtains without asking, and hung up family photos that had been in storage, including several of Jake's ex-girlfriend from high school, apparently by mistake. When I asked about consulting me before making major changes to our living space, she started crying and saying she was just trying to make a nice home for everyone and that I was being ungrateful and hurtful. Robert's situation is more complex and heartbreaking. On his good days, he's mostly the man I remember, quiet, polite, content to watch his Western reruns and stay out of the way. He'll ask thoughtful questions about my work, play simple games with Emma, and sometimes helps fold laundry in his slow, methodical way. These glimpses of his former self make everything harder because I can see the man he used to be trapped inside this confused, sometimes frightening stranger. But on his bad days, which are becoming more frequent, he becomes a completely different person. He gets confused and sometimes verbally aggressive, occasionally even physically intimidating. Last month's wallet incident was just the latest in a long series of accusations and paranoid episodes. He accused me of stealing his wallet. It was in his jacket pocket where it always is, and called me a scheming bitch in front of my daughter. When I tried to calmly explain where his wallet was and help him find it, he started yelling that I was lying and trying to make him look crazy to cover up my theft. "Don't you dare gaslight me, you little thief," he shouted, getting red in the face. "I know what you're doing, trying to confuse me, so I won't notice you taking my things." Emma started crying, which made Robert even more agitated. "Now look what you've done, upsetting the baby with your lies." Jake wasn't home. He was at his quarterly sales meeting, and I had to comfort my terrified daughter while also trying to de-escalate a situation with a 6-foot-tall man who was convinced I was stealing from him. Other bad day incidents have included Him forgetting who I am entirely and asking Linda why there's a strange woman in their house, wandering into my bedroom at 2 a.m. looking for the bathroom and refusing to leave because he was convinced it was his room, throwing a plate of spaghetti across the kitchen because he insisted I was trying to poison him with foreign food. It was ragu from a jar. Standing in our driveway at 6 a.m. in his underwear because he thought he was late for work at a job he retired from 15 years ago, and calling the police because he was certain that Emma and I were imposters who had kidnapped his real family. That police incident was particularly traumatic. I was giving Emma a bath when I heard sirens outside. I looked out to see 2 patrol cars in our driveway and Robert on the front porch, gesticulating wildly and pointing at our house. The officers were trying to calm him down while Linda stood crying in her bathrobe. Apparently, Robert had called 911 and reported a home invasion, describing Emma and me as strangers who had tied up his family and were holding them hostage. I had to come outside in my pajamas and explain to 2 very concerned police officers that Robert had dementia-related episodes and that we were his family, while my wet, naked toddler screamed from the bathtub upstairs and our neighbors came out to gawk at the spectacle. The officers were professional but clearly didn't know what to make of the situation. One of them suggested we look into getting Robert evaluated for his own safety, but when I mentioned it to Jake later, he got defensive and said his father was just having a rough patch. The doctor says Robert's behavior is normal for stroke patients with cognitive damage, but normal doesn't make it less traumatic for me and Emma. Each episode leaves me shaky and exhausted, never knowing what might trigger the next one or how bad it might get. I find myself walking on eggshells around Robert, monitoring his mood, and trying to anticipate problems before they escalate. I've had exactly 0 privacy or personal space for half a decade. They officially have just the guest room, but in practice they treat the entire house like theirs. Linda goes through our mail regularly and offers commentary on our spending habits. Sarah, do you really need to be ordering so much from Amazon? And this electric bill seems high. Are you remembering to turn off lights when you leave rooms? She's made suggestions about Emma's school performance. Maybe she needs more structure at home. Children today are too coddled. My work schedule. Part-time might be better for the family. Career women miss so much. And our marriage. Jake works so hard. He needs more support at home. Men require more appreciation than women realize. Linda walks into rooms where Jake and I are talking and acts like she belongs there, settling herself into a chair and waiting expectantly to be included in the conversation. Private discussions about our finances, Emma's behavior, or our relationship plans become group conversations whether we want them to or not. When I've tried to say, Linda, Jake, and I need to discuss this privately, she gets hurt and says things like, I'm family too, I'm just trying to help, or I raised 3 children, I might have some wisdom to share. Our sex life is completely, utterly non-existent. Not reduced, eliminated entirely. The walls in our 1950s house are paper thin, Linda and Robert are always home, and any attempt at intimacy gets interrupted by someone having a crisis or needing something. The few times we've tried to be romantic, we've been interrupted by Robert having a confused episode where he was convinced someone was breaking into the house, or Linda knocking on our bedroom door asking if we'd seen her reading glasses, or just the general awareness that 2 elderly people are sitting 20 feet away watching Wheel of Fortune at maximum volume. The spontaneity and passion that used to define our relationship has been completely killed. We can't have a romantic dinner because Linda will join us and critique the meal. We can't take a bath together because someone might need the bathroom. We can't sleep in on weekends because Robert gets up at 5:30 a.m. and starts his day by listening to talk radio at a volume that would wake the dead. We can't even cuddle on the couch watching a movie because Linda will appear with her own blanket and commentary about how violent or inappropriate everything is. I haven't had friends over in years because I'm mortified by the chaos and unpredictability of our household. My best friend Sarah used to come over regularly for wine nights where we'd gossip, watch trashy reality TV, and just decompress from our stressful jobs. But after that evening where Linda monopolized the conversation, and especially after the incident where Robert accused Sarah of trying to steal our TV during one of his paranoid episodes, she stopped visiting altogether. I don't blame Sarah. I wouldn't want to deal with this either if I had a choice. but it means I've become increasingly isolated from my support system. My other friends have stopped inviting me to gatherings at their homes because I can never reciprocate. I can't host book club or game night or birthday parties. I can't have people over for holidays because Linda takes over the kitchen and Robert might have an episode that scares everyone. My friend Jessica had her baby shower at my house 3 years ago, back when I was still trying to maintain some semblance of a social life, and it was a disaster. Linda inserted herself into every conversation, criticized the decorations I'd spent hours preparing, and rearranged the gift table because it looked messy. Robert came downstairs in his pajamas during the party and announced loudly that there were too many women making too much noise and could we keep it down because some people are trying to rest. When Jessica's mom complimented the food I'd made, Linda jumped in with, "Oh, I helped with that. Sarah's still learning how to cook for a crowd." I was so embarrassed that I haven't offered to host anything since. My social life now consists of grabbing coffee with coworkers during lunch breaks and the occasional girls' night out, but even those are limited because I feel guilty leaving Jake alone to deal with his parents, and because Linda makes passive-aggressive comments about me, gallivanting around, when there's so much to do at home. The financial strain has been enormous and constantly stressful. Our grocery bills have nearly doubled because we're feeding 4 adults instead of 2, and Robert and Linda both have specific dietary needs and preferences. Linda requires low-sodium everything due to blood pressure issues, but then complains that the food tastes bland. Robert is supposed to eat heart-healthy meals, but he wants comfort foods like fried chicken and meatloaf. They both take medications that affect their appetite and digestion, leading to waste when they can't finish meals or decide they don't like something after I've already cooked it. The utilities are significantly higher because someone's always home, running the TV, lights, heat, and air conditioning. Linda keeps the thermostat at 78 degrees in summer and 72 in winter because she's always cold, which has tripled our energy bills. She runs loads of laundry every day because she changes clothes multiple times due to spills and accidents, and she insists on washing everything in hot water for sanitary reasons. We've had to spend thousands out of pocket on home modifications and medical equipment. We installed grab bars in both bathrooms, a shower seat, raised toilet seats, and better lighting throughout the house. We bought Robert a hospital bed when his regular mattress became too difficult for him to get in and out of safely. We converted our home office, my former sanctuary where I could work on projects and have some quiet time, into a makeshift physical therapy space with mats, resistance bands, and other equipment Robert needs for his exercises. Insurance covers some of these expenses, but not all, and certainly not quickly. I've spent countless hours on the phone with Medicare representatives, insurance companies, and medical supply companies trying to navigate coverage and reimbursements. It's become like a part-time job in itself, managing all the paperwork and appointments and prior authorizations. But the emotional toll has been the worst part by far. I feel like I'm constantly walking on eggshells, trying to keep everyone happy while slowly losing myself in the process. Every decision, from what to make for dinner to what TV show to watch, becomes a negotiation with multiple parties who all have strong opinions and little flexibility. I used to be confident and outgoing, someone who spoke up in meetings at work and wasn't afraid to voice my opinions. Now I find myself second-guessing every decision, anticipating criticism, and backing down from confrontations even in professional settings. My boss has noticed the change and asked if everything is okay at home, but how do you explain that you're being slowly crushed by the weight of other people's needs without sounding like a terrible person? I've started having panic attacks. The first one was during Thanksgiving dinner last year. Linda had criticized everything from the turkey temperature to the way I'd set the table, all in front of my parents and Jake's siblings. "Sarah, the stuffing is a little dry. Didn't you add enough broth? And these Brussels sprouts are overdone. They should still have some bite to them." When I suggested that people could add gravy if they wanted more moisture, she said, "Well, I suppose not everyone can be a natural cook. It takes practice." Something about that comment, delivered in front of people whose approval I cared about, just broke something inside me. I excused myself to the bathroom and suddenly couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, my heart was racing, and I was convinced I was having a heart attack. I sat on the bathroom floor, hyperventilating for 20 minutes while everyone wondered where I'd gone. Since then, the attacks happen at least twice a week, usually triggered by some combination of Linda's criticism, Robert's confusion, or just the overwhelming feeling of being trapped in a situation with no end in sight. My doctor wants to put me on anxiety medication, but I'm worried about being foggy or slow when I need to deal with crisis situations at home. What if Robert has an episode and I'm too medicated to handle it properly? Emma has been affected more than I initially realized. She started having nightmares about scary old people, and she doesn't want to bring friends over because Grandpa Robert might yell and scare them. Last month, her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called because Emma had told her class during show and tell that her house was too loud and scary, and she wished her grandparents would go back to their own house like other kids' grandparents. Mrs. Rodriguez was tactful, but clearly concerned about the home environment. She asked if everything was okay and whether Emma felt safe at home. I had to explain that we were caring for elderly relatives and that sometimes there were challenging moments, but that Emma was never in danger. Still, it was mortifying to realize that my 6-year-old was so affected by the situation that she was discussing it at school. Emma has also started mimicking some of Linda's critical behavior, telling me that my hair looks messy or that I should try harder with my appearance, phrases she's clearly picked up from her grandmother's constant commentary. When I asked her where she learned to talk like that, she said matter-of-factly, "Grandma Linda says ladies should always look their best and that you don't care about how you look anymore." The breaking point came last Thursday afternoon. I'd had a particularly stressful morning at work dealing with a crisis with one of our biggest clients, and during lunch I had another panic attack in the bathroom. My boss Janet sent me home early, expressing genuine concern about my well-being. She's been worried about me for months, noting that my usual cheerful, energetic demeanor has been replaced by what she calls walking on glass energy, always tense, always anticipating the next problem. When I got home around 2 p.m., I found the front door unlocked and Linda's voice coming from upstairs. I followed the sound to my bedroom, where I discovered her sitting on my bed, surrounded by 3 large garbage bags full of my clothes. My closet doors were wide open, and about half of my wardrobe was laid out across the bed in various piles. "Oh, good. You're home early," Linda said brightly, as if this was a perfectly normal scene. "I was organizing your closet and realized you have so many inappropriate things. I thought I'd help you sort through everything." She gestured to the garbage bags with obvious pride in her accomplishment. I stood frozen in the doorway, trying to process what I was seeing. Linda had gone through every single item of clothing I owned and made unilateral decisions about what was appropriate for me to wear. She had thrown away my favorite dress, a beautiful blue wrap dress that Jake had bought me for our 5th anniversary, because it showed too much shoulder and was too form-fitting for a mother. My work blazers were apparently too tight and gave off the wrong impression. My jeans were immodest because they weren't loose enough. Even my pajamas hadn't escaped judgment. Silk shorts and camisole sets were replaced with oversized cotton nightgowns because married women shouldn't dress to entice. She had kept only the frumpy, oversized clothes that made me look and feel like a shapeless blob. Baggy sweaters, loose-fitting pants, and shapeless dresses that I'd bought during a brief phase where I thought modest meant invisible. Looking at the meager pile of approved clothing, I realized that Linda's vision of appropriate attire for me would essentially erase any sense of personal style or femininity I had left. "What gave you the right to go through my personal belongings and throw away my clothes?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level despite the rage building inside me. Linda immediately got defensive, her tone shifting from cheerful to hurt. "I was helping. You're so busy with work and taking care of everyone, you don't have time to properly organize your things. I was doing you a favor, making sure you have clothes that reflect well on Jake and show that you're a respectable wife and mother. You should be grateful instead of attacking me for trying to help." The word grateful was like a match to gasoline. Grateful? You went through my private belongings without permission and threw away hundreds of dollars worth of my clothing based on your personal opinions about what I should wear. This is completely inappropriate, and you had no right to touch my things. "I live here too." Linda snapped back, her mask of sweet helpfulness finally slipping. "I'm not some stranger. I'm family. I was just trying to help you look more respectable. Some of those clothes were completely inappropriate for a woman your age with a child. What would people think? It doesn't matter what you think people would think. These are MY clothes, in MY closet, in MY bedroom, and you had no right to touch any of it. My voice was getting louder despite my efforts to stay calm. Linda started crying then, the dramatic, wounded tears of someone who's been wronged. I can't do anything right in this house. I try to help and all I get is criticism and anger. I'm an old woman trying to make herself useful, and this is how I'm treated. Jake is going to be so disappointed in how cruel you're being to his mother. Jake chose that moment to come home from work early, walking into the bedroom to find his mother sobbing and me frantically trying to retrieve my belongings from garbage bags. Without even asking what had happened or trying to understand the situation, he immediately took her side. Mom, what's wrong? Why are you crying? Then, turning to me with accusation in his voice, what did you do to upset her? Your mother went through my closet and threw away my clothes without asking, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake looked confused, as if this couldn't possibly be the whole story. Mom was just trying to help. Why are you making such a big deal out of this? She's old and bored. She doesn't mean any harm. She's not trying to hurt anyone. She threw away the dress you bought me for our anniversary, I said, pulling the blue wrap dress from one of the garbage bags. She decided it was inappropriate and got rid of it along with most of my other clothes. Jake barely glanced at the dress before dismissing my concerns. It's just clothes, Sarah. You can buy new ones if it's such a problem. Mom was trying to be helpful. She wasn't doing it to be malicious. You're overreacting. That dismissal, after 5 years of me bending over backwards to accommodate his parents, sacrificing my privacy, my mental health, my social life, and my sense of self, broke something fundamental inside me. The man who used to love the way I looked in that dress, who had spent an hour picking it out because he thought it was perfect for me, was now telling me it didn't matter that his mother had thrown it away because she disapproved of it. I'm overreacting? I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. Your mother violated my privacy, destroyed my personal property, and tried to control what I'm allowed to wear in my own home, and I'm overreacting for being upset about it. Jake was getting frustrated, clearly wanting this problem to just go away. Look, I'll talk to her about asking first next time, okay? But she was just trying to help. You know, she doesn't mean any harm. Can't you just appreciate that she cares enough to want to help? That night, after Emma was in bed and Robert was settled in front of his Western reruns, I sat Jake down at the kitchen table and told him that I couldn't do this anymore. His parents needed to move out within 90 days, or I would be filing for divorce and seeking primary custody of our daughter. Jake's reaction was immediate and explosive. He started yelling about how I was heartless and trying to destroy his family. You're being dramatic and selfish. My parents are old, and they need our help. You're trying to force me to choose between my wife and my parents. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who's been helping your parents for 5 years while slowly losing her mind in the process, I replied. I've sacrificed everything, my privacy, my mental health, my friendships, my marriage, my sense of self, to help your parents. But I can't continue living like this. It's not sustainable, and it's not fair to me or Emma. Jake accused me of never really caring about his family, saying this proved I was the kind of person who abandons people when things get tough. If you really loved me, you'd find a way to make it work. This is what marriage is about, supporting each other through difficult times, not running away when things get hard. I tried to explain that I had been supporting him through difficult times for 5 years, that I'd given up countless aspects of my life to help his parents, but that there had to be some limit to what was reasonable to expect from a person. What's your solution, Jake? Because nothing has changed in 5 years except that your parents are getting more dependent and more difficult, and I'm getting closer to a complete breakdown. What exactly are we supposed to figure out that we haven't already tried? Jake had no answer except we'll figure something out, the same non-answer he'd been giving for 5 years. When I pressed him for specifics, for any concrete plan or timeline or alternative solution, he got angry and said I was being unreasonable and unsupportive. You knew when you married me that family was important to me, he said. This is just temporary until we can find them a good place. You can't expect me to just abandon my parents because you're a little stressed. A little stress? I repeated incredulously. Jake, I'm having panic attacks twice a week. I cry in my car before coming home, every day. Our daughter is having nightmares and doesn't want to bring friends over. I haven't had a private conversation with my husband in years or felt comfortable in my own home. This isn't a little stress. This is a complete breakdown of our family life. The argument continued for hours, going in circles with Jake insisting I just needed to be more patient and understanding, and me pointing out that 5 years of patience had gotten us nowhere except deeper into an unsustainable situation. Finally, exhausted and defeated, I told him my ultimatum was final. 90 days to find alternative arrangements for his parents, or I would be consulting a divorce attorney. Jake has given me the complete silent treatment for over a week now. He sleeps on the couch, leaves for work without saying goodbye, and communicates with me only through Emma. Tell mommy dinner is ready, or ask mommy if she's picking you up from school tomorrow. It's incredibly childish and confusing for our daughter, who keeps asking why daddy won't talk to mommy and whether she did something wrong. The extended family dynamics have become a nightmare. Jake's siblings are either financially unable to help, geographically distant, or conveniently unavailable whenever the topic comes up. His sister Emma, yes, we named our daughter after her, a decision that feels ironic now, is genuinely in a tough spot. She's 29, works as a manager at a retail chain making about $35,000 a year, and lives in a 400-square-foot studio apartment in the city. She's also paying off student loans and trying to save money to eventually buy a place of her own. When Jake asked if she could take their parents, she broke down crying and said she'd love to help but literally has no space and no money to contribute to their care. I actually don't blame Emma for not being able to help. Her situation is legitimately difficult, and at least she's honest about her limitations. She calls Linda regularly, visits when she can, and genuinely cares about her parents' well-being. She's also been sympathetic to my situation, quietly acknowledging that 5 years is a really long time and that she doesn't know how I've managed it. Jake's brother Mark is an entirely different story, and frankly the source of most of my anger toward the extended family. Mark is 38, works as a software engineer for a major tech company, and lives in San Diego with his wife Sarah and their twin 10-year-old sons. Based on his social media presence, they're doing very well financially. Recent posts show a beautiful 4-bedroom house with a pool, a new BMW for Sarah, expensive family vacations to Hawaii and Europe, and the kids in expensive sports leagues and music lessons. But every time the topic of helping with Robert and Linda comes up, Mark suddenly becomes unavailable or full of excuses. I wish I could help, but California is so expensive, and the kids have so many activities, and Sarah's not comfortable with elderly care because her grandmother had dementia, and it was traumatic for her. He sends $200 for Christmas and birthdays and acts like he's being incredibly generous. What makes it worse is that Mark visits maybe once a year, stays for 3 days, and spends the entire time talking about how great his parents look and how well cared for they are, as if this validates his decision to contribute nothing to their care. He takes photos of himself with Robert and Linda and posts them on Facebook with captions like, "So grateful for family time," and "Blessed to have such wonderful parents," then flies back to his comfortable life and leaves us to deal with the daily reality. Jake refuses to confront Mark about his lack of contribution, saying, "Everyone has their own situation, and we can't force people to help if they're not able to." But Mark's inability seems conveniently selective. He can afford a $60,000 BMW, but can't contribute $500 a month toward his parents' care? The extended family has made me into the villain of this situation. Jake's Aunt Patricia, Linda's younger sister, has been calling me at all hours to lecture me about family duty. Family takes care of family, Sarah. In our day, we respected our elders and didn't ship them off to strangers just because it was inconvenient. A real wife would support her husband through anything, not give ultimatums like some kind of business negotiation. What Patricia conveniently doesn't mention is that she lives in a 55-plus community that has strict rules about long-term guests, and she's made it crystal clear that having Robert and Linda stay with her is impossible due to HOA regulations. She also travels extensively with her retired teacher's pension and her late husband's life insurance money, spending months at a time in Florida or on cruises. But apparently her lifestyle shouldn't be disrupted by caregiving responsibilities. Only mine should. Jake's cousin Michelle, Patricia's daughter, posted a lengthy Facebook rant that was obviously directed at me, though she didn't mention names. It's so sad when people abandon family members who sacrificed everything for them. Some people today don't understand what commitment and duty mean. When my grandparents needed help, our whole family rallied around them, because that's what real families do. I could never imagine giving someone an ultimatum about caring for elderly relatives. That's just heartless. The post got dozens of likes and comments from Jake's relatives, all talking about duty and sacrifice and how young people today don't understand commitment. Half of these people haven't visited Robert and Linda once in the 5 years they've lived with us, but apparently they're experts on family loyalty and caregiving responsibilities. What makes Michelle's post particularly galling is that when her own grandmother needed care, the family rallying around consisted of her moving into a nice assisted living facility paid for by the sale of her house, with occasional visits from various family members. Nobody moved in with relatives and gave up their entire life to provide 24/7 care. But somehow my situation is different, and I'm expected to sacrifice indefinitely. My own parents have been somewhat supportive, but ultimately unhelpful. Mom keeps saying that marriage is about sacrifice and compromise, and that every relationship goes through hard times that test your commitment. You made vows, Sarah, for better or worse, in sickness and in health. This is the worst part, and it's when your character is really tested. Dad, who's always been more practical, asked detailed questions about what resources we'd explored for elder care. When I explained that we'd been on waiting lists for years, that private care was financially impossible, and that Jake's siblings weren't contributing, he suggested I get a second job to help pay for professional care. Maybe you could pick up some freelance work in the evenings or get a weekend job, he said. If money is the main obstacle, then the solution is to make more money. When I pointed out that I was already working full-time, managing a household of 4 adults, dealing with medical appointments and crises, and raising a young daughter, he seemed genuinely confused about why adding more work to my schedule wasn't a viable solution. Neither of my parents seemed to understand that this isn't just about money, though the financial strain is certainly part of it. It's about the fact that I'm losing myself and my marriage in the process of caring for people who seem to have no appreciation for the sacrifices I'm making. My sister Jessica thinks I'm being too accommodating and should have set boundaries years ago. You train them to treat you like this, she says bluntly. You can't be surprised when people take advantage of someone who never says no. You've been acting like a live-in nurse and housekeeper for 5 years. Of course they see you that way now. While Jessica is probably right that I should have established clearer boundaries from the beginning, her Monday morning quarterbacking doesn't help me figure out what to do now. It's easy to say what I should have done differently when you're not the one living in the situation. Jessica lives 3 states away with her husband and twin toddlers, and when I've tried to explain the day-to-day reality of my situation, she tends to minimize it. Can't you just ignore Linda's comments? Why do you let Robert's episodes get to you so much? Just tell them you need space. She doesn't understand that you can't just ignore people you live with, especially when one of them is in your bedroom throwing away your clothes and the other is calling the police because he thinks you're a home invader. The guilt I feel is absolutely crushing and keeps me awake most nights. I lie there thinking about Robert and Linda, who are genuinely frail and scared and confused about what's happening to their lives. Robert didn't choose to have a stroke that scrambled his brain and made him suspicious of the people trying to help him. Linda didn't choose to develop arthritis that makes simple tasks agonizing and leaves her feeling useless and frustrated. They spent their lives working hard and saving money, only to see it all disappear due to medical bills and circumstances beyond their control. Now they're dependent on others in ways that must be humiliating and terrifying for them. Linda used to be the one everyone came to for advice and help. Now she can't even open a jar of pickles without assistance. Robert was a man who prided himself on being a provider and protector. Now he sometimes can't remember where he is or who the people around him are. I know they're not trying to be difficult or manipulative. They're just scared, elderly people who have lost control of their lives and are grasping for whatever stability and autonomy they can find. Linda's need to control the household probably stems from feeling powerless about everything else in her life. Robert's paranoia and aggression are symptoms of brain damage, not character flaws. But understanding the reasons behind their behavior doesn't make it easier to live with the consequences. Compassion fatigue is a real thing, and after 5 years of being the primary target of Linda's criticism and Robert's confusion, I'm emotionally exhausted. I feel guilty for being frustrated with people who can't help their limitations, but I also feel resentful about being expected to absorb unlimited amounts of stress and criticism without complaint. The waiting list for subsidized senior housing in our area is genuinely over 2 years long, and that's assuming Robert and Linda would even qualify. Most subsidized housing has strict income requirements, asset limitations, and lengthy application processes that can be overwhelming for elderly people who don't understand modern bureaucracy. I've spent hours on the phone with various agencies trying to navigate the maze of requirements and waiting lists. Adult day programs are at capacity with their own waiting lists. In-home care services are available but expensive. Even a few hours a day of professional help would cost more than we can afford while still covering our existing expenses. Private assisted living facilities that could handle Robert's level of care start at around $4,000 per month for basic services, and that's in the cheaper facilities that frankly look more like warehouses than homes. The nicer places that I'd feel comfortable putting my own parents cost $6,000 to $8,000 monthly. Robert and Linda's combined Social Security income is about $2,800 per month, leaving a gap of at least $1,200 that would have to be covered by family. Moving them to a state with better senior services would mean leaving everything familiar at a time when familiarity is one of the few things that helps Robert stay oriented. It would also mean researching services in other states, arranging long-distance moves for elderly people with mobility issues, and potentially starting over with new doctors and specialists who don't know their medical history. I've researched every option I can think of, spent countless hours making phone calls and filling out applications, and attended seminars about elder care options. The reality is that our society doesn't have adequate infrastructure for caring for aging populations, especially people who need more support than basic independent living but don't qualify for full nursing home care. But while I intellectually understand that this is a systemic problem that goes beyond our individual situation, I'm still the one living with the daily consequences of that inadequate system. I'm still the one getting criticized for not cleaning thoroughly enough, getting accused of theft and manipulation, having my privacy violated, and watching my marriage disintegrate under the strain. The impact on Emma has become increasingly worrying and is probably the thing that bothers me most about this entire situation. She started having nightmares about scary old people and frequently asks when Grandma and Grandpa are going back to their own house like normal grandparents. Last week she drew a picture at school of our family, and when her teacher asked her to explain it, Emma said, "That's Mommy crying, and that's Daddy angry, and those are the loud old people who live at our house." Emma has become clingy and anxious in ways she never was before. She follows me around the house like she's afraid to leave me alone with Linda and Robert. She's started wetting the bed occasionally, something she hadn't done since she was 3. When I tuck her in at night, she often asks, "Are Grandma and Grandpa going to be loud tonight? Or will you check my door to make sure Grandpa doesn't come in my room?" The incident with her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a wake-up call about how much the situation is affecting Emma's sense of security and normalcy. During a classroom discussion about families, Emma apparently told her classmates that her grandparents live at her house because they're too sick to live alone but not sick enough for the hospital, so Mommy has to take care of them even though it makes her sad all the time. Mrs. Rodriguez called me in for a conference, not because she was concerned about abuse or neglect, but because she could see that Emma was carrying emotional burdens that were inappropriate for a 6-year-old. "Emma talks about her home situation like a little adult," she said gently. "She seems to understand that there are financial and practical constraints on your family's options, which suggests she's been exposed to adult conversations and stress that children shouldn't have to process." Emma has also started mimicking Linda's critical behavior in ways that alarm me. She'll comment that my hair looks messy or that I should try harder with my appearance, phrases that are clearly not coming from other 6-year-olds. When I asked her where she learned to talk like that, She said matter-of-factly, "Grandma Linda says ladies should always look their best and that you don't care about how you look anymore since you got married." Last month, Emma told her friend's mother that her house was too crowded and asked if she could have playdates at their house instead because Grandpa Robert sometimes gets confused and yells, and Grandma Linda doesn't like kids making noise. I was mortified when the other mother relayed this conversation to me, but I also couldn't argue with Emma's assessment of the situation. The breaking point with the clothes incident wasn't just about the violation of my privacy or the destruction of my property, though those were certainly significant. It was about the realization that Linda felt entitled to control not just the household environment, but my personal appearance and self-expression. The symbolism of throwing away the dress Jake had bought me, the one that made me feel beautiful and confident, felt like she was trying to erase the person I used to be and replace her with someone more acceptable to her vision of what a daughter-in-law should be. Looking at the pile of approved clothing, shapeless, colorless, designed to hide rather than flatter, I realized that Linda's version of helping me meant transforming me into someone who wouldn't threaten her position as the primary woman in the household. The tight blazers that showed I was a competent professional, the flattering dresses that reminded Jake he was married to an attractive woman, the stylish jeans that suggested I had an identity beyond caregiver. All of these had to go. When Jake dismissed my feelings about the clothes as overreacting and suggested I could just buy new ones, he was missing the point entirely. This wasn't about the monetary value of the clothing, though hundreds of dollars is nothing to sneeze at in our strained budget. It was about the fact that his mother felt entitled to make unilateral decisions about my body, my appearance, and my self-expression, and he saw nothing wrong with that. Jake's reaction revealed something that I'd been trying to ignore for months. He no longer saw me as his partner and equal. Somewhere in the past 5 years, I'd been reclassified in his mind from wife to caregiver, someone whose job it was to accommodate his parents' needs without complaint, regardless of the personal cost. The silent treatment he's giving me now is perhaps the most childish and manipulative thing he's ever done. He's essentially holding our marriage hostage, trying to force me to back down from my ultimatum by making our home environment even more unbearable. Instead of engaging with the legitimate concerns I've raised about the sustainability of our current situation, he's chosen to punish me for daring to set boundaries. What makes his behavior even more frustrating is that he's involving Emma in his passive-aggressive campaign. Using our 6-year-old daughter as a messenger to avoid speaking directly to his wife is not just immature, it's harmful to Emma's sense of security and normalcy. She keeps asking me why Daddy won't talk to Mommy and whether she did something wrong, and I'm running out of age-appropriate ways to explain adult dysfunction. Jake's extended family has rallied around him in ways that would be admirable if their support involved actually helping with the caregiving responsibilities rather than just criticizing my reaction to them. His Aunt Patricia calls me at least every other day, usually around dinner time, to deliver lectures about family duty and proper wifely behavior. "Sarah, I've been thinking about your situation, and I really think you need to reconsider this ultimatum," she said in yesterday's call. "Marriage is about sacrifice, and right now your husband needs your support more than ever. His parents won't be around forever. Can't you just endure a little longer for the sake of family harmony?" When I pointed out that a little longer had already been 5 years with no end in sight, Patricia got defensive. 5 years isn't that long in the grand scheme of things. Some people care for elderly parents for decades. You're acting like this is some kind of unusual burden, but it's actually quite normal for families to care for their elderly members. I asked Patricia if she'd be willing to take Linda and Robert for even 6 months to give us a break, knowing full well what her answer would be. "Oh, Sarah, you know I would love to help, but my HOA has very strict rules about long-term guests, and my condo really isn't set up for people with mobility issues. Plus, I have my book club and my bridge group and my volunteer commitments. I couldn't give Linda and Robert the attention they deserve." The hypocrisy is breathtaking. Patricia can't disrupt her book club and bridge games to help care for her own sister, but I'm expected to sacrifice my career, marriage, and mental health indefinitely. Her volunteer commitments are more important than caregiving, but my need for personal space and privacy makes me selfish and ungrateful. Michelle's Facebook post generated a flood of supportive comments from Jake's relatives, most of whom I barely know and who certainly don't know the details of our situation. Jake's second cousin posted, "So true. Family comes first always." Jake's great-aunt commented, "Young people today don't understand duty and commitment like we did." His uncle shared the post with the caption, "This is what's wrong with society today. No one wants to sacrifice for family anymore." None of these people have offered to help in any concrete way. None of them have visited Robert and Linda or offered financial assistance or respite care. But they're all experts on what I should be doing and how I should be feeling about it. The most infuriating comment came from Jake's cousin David, who lives 2 states away and has seen Robert and Linda exactly once in the past 5 years. He wrote, "When my kids were little and money was tight, my wife and I made it work, because that's what families do. Some people today just want the easy way out instead of making sacrifices for the people they love." I wanted to respond that David's wife didn't have to care for 4 adults while dealing with dementia episodes and constant criticism, but I knew that engaging would only make me look defensive and would provide more ammunition for people who had already decided I was the villain in this situation. The social media campaign against me has extended beyond Facebook. Jake's niece posted an Instagram story with a quote about fake family members who abandon you when things get tough, clearly directed at me. Linda herself has started making passive-aggressive posts about ungrateful people and the decline of family values, which get liked and shared by dozens of Jake's relatives. I've considered responding publicly to defend myself and provide context about the actual situation, but my therapist, yes, I finally started seeing one, advised against it. "Social media arguments never change anyone's mind," she said. "The people who matter will understand your situation, and the people who are determined to vilify you will find reasons to do so regardless of what you say." My therapist has been helpful in validating my feelings and helping me understand that caregiver burnout is a real, documented phenomenon that affects millions of people. She's explained that the guilt I feel is normal, but not necessarily rational, that setting boundaries and prioritizing my own well-being doesn't make me a bad person, even when other people say it does. "You've been in crisis mode for 5 years, she told me during our second session. "Your nervous system has been in a constant state of hypervigilance, waiting for the next emergency or criticism or conflict. That's not sustainable long-term, and the panic attacks are your body's way of telling you that you've reached your limit." She's also helped me understand that Jake's reaction to my ultimatum, the silent treatment, the refusal to engage with solutions, the emotional manipulation, suggests that he may have his own issues around conflict avoidance and family dynamics that go beyond this specific situation. "It sounds like Jake has been trained from childhood to avoid upsetting his parents at all costs," she observed. "Setting boundaries with them probably feels impossible to him, so he's expecting you to absorb all the stress and dysfunction instead. That's not fair to you, and it's not actually helping his parents in the long run." The therapy sessions have been both helpful and devastating. Helpful because they've validated my experience and given me tools for managing my anxiety and guilt. Devastating because they've made me realize how much damage this situation has done to my sense of self and my relationship with Jake. "When did you last do something just because you wanted to do it?" my therapist asked during our third session. I sat there for several minutes trying to think of an example and came up empty. Every decision I make is filtered through considerations of how it will affect Linda and Robert, whether it will create conflict with Jake, and what additional stress it might add to an already overwhelmed household. I can't remember the last time I bought myself something frivolous, went out with friends without feeling guilty about leaving Jake alone to manage his parents, or made plans without first checking to make sure there weren't any medical appointments or family obligations that would take priority. "You've become so focused on managing everyone else's needs that you've lost track of your own," she said gently. That level of self-sacrifice might seem noble, but it's not actually sustainable or healthy. You can't pour from an empty cup. The more I think about my therapist's observations, the more I realize that this pattern of self-sacrifice and boundary crossing has been building for years, not just around the caregiving situation. Jake has always been someone who avoids conflict and difficult conversations, preferring to let problems fester rather than address them directly. I've always been someone who tries to fix things and make everyone happy, often at my own expense. Our dynamic worked reasonably well when we were just dealing with normal relationship challenges, different preferences about money management, social activities, household chores. But the addition of two elderly, dependent people with complex needs has exposed the fundamental flaws in how we handle stress and make decisions as a couple. Jake's response to every caregiving crisis has been to assume that I'll handle it, that I'll find a way to make it work, that I'll absorb the stress, so he doesn't have to deal with the uncomfortable reality of his parents' declining health and limited options. My response has been to do exactly that, to the point where I'm now having panic attacks and contemplating divorce. Neither of us has been willing to have the hard conversations about what we can realistically provide versus what Robert and Linda actually need, what the long-term plan should be, or how to balance caregiving responsibilities with maintaining our own relationship and family. The 90-day ultimatum I gave Jake was the first time in 5 years that I'd drawn a hard line about anything related to his parents. Every other boundary I'd attempted to set had been negotiated away or ignored until I gave up and went back to accommodating everyone else's needs. I'm starting to realize that my ultimatum wasn't really about the clothes incident, though that was certainly the final straw. It was about the recognition that this situation will never change unless someone forces it to change, and that Jake has demonstrated over 5 years that he's not willing or able to be that person. Jake's siblings continue to be conveniently unavailable whenever specific help is requested, but happy to offer opinions about what Jake and I should be doing differently. Emma, Jake's sister, sent a long text message last week expressing sympathy for my situation but explaining why she can't provide any concrete assistance. "I feel terrible about everything you're going through," she wrote. "I know how hard this must be, and I really admire how much you've sacrificed for Mom and Dad. I wish I could do more to help, but my apartment is literally too small for even one additional person, and I'm barely covering my own expenses. I hope you and Jake can work something out because I know Mom and Dad are scared about what happens if they have to leave your house." While I appreciate Emma's acknowledgement of my sacrifices, her message doesn't offer any solutions or alternatives. It's essentially saying, "I recognize this is unsustainable for you, but I hope you'll continue doing it anyway because the alternatives are scary." Mark's response to Jake's request for help was even more frustrating. He called Jake last week and spent an hour explaining why increasing his contribution to their parents' care would be financially impossible given his current commitments. According to Jake's recap of the conversation, Mark's reasoning included: the kids' sports and music lessons cost $800 per month, and he can't disappoint them by cutting activities. Sarah's car payment is $650 per month, and they need reliable transportation for her job. Their mortgage is higher than expected because they bought during a competitive market. California taxes are much higher than they anticipated when they moved there. They're trying to save for the kids' college education and can't afford to reduce their monthly savings. Mark offered to increase his contribution from $200 to $300 per month, acting like this was a significant sacrifice that demonstrated his commitment to family. When Jake pointed out that this increase wouldn't even cover one day of professional care for Robert, Mark got defensive and said that every family has different financial capabilities and that he was doing the best he could. The most galling part of Mark's excuses is that they're all choices rather than genuine limitations. He could choose a less expensive car for his wife, or reduce the kids' activities, or temporarily reduce his college savings. But those choices would require him to make actual sacrifices, whereas expecting Jake and me to continue our current arrangement requires no sacrifice from him at all. Jake's unwillingness to confront Mark directly about his lack of contribution has become another source of tension between us. When I suggested that Jake should be more direct about what we need from Mark, Jake said he didn't want to cause family drama or force people to help if they don't want to. But Mark is causing family drama, I pointed out. He's choosing to let his brother's marriage fall apart rather than contribute meaningfully to their parents' care. His choice to prioritize his comfortable lifestyle over family obligations is already causing drama. It's just drama that you're absorbing instead of him. Jake's response was that everyone has different situations and capabilities, and that we can't force people to help beyond their comfort level. This attitude might be admirable in theory, but in practice it means that the people who are willing to sacrifice, us, end up carrying the entire burden while the people who aren't willing to sacrifice, Mark, get to maintain their comfortable lives without consequence. The financial calculations are actually pretty straightforward, though Jake seems reluctant to lay them out clearly for his siblings. Robert and Linda's combined income is about $2,800 per month. The cheapest assisted living facility that could handle Robert's needs costs $4,200 monthly. That leaves a gap of $1,400 that needs to be covered by family. If that $1,400 were split evenly among Jake's 3 children, each would contribute about $467 monthly, less than Mark currently spends on his kids' extracurricular activities. Emma genuinely can't afford that amount, but if Jake and Mark each contributed $600 monthly and Emma contributed what she could, maybe $200, the shortfall would be manageable. Instead, Jake and I have been covering not just our theoretical $467 share, but also the additional costs of housing, feeding, and caring for 2 additional adults in our home, plus the opportunity costs of my reduced work capacity and our inability to pursue career opportunities that might require relocation. When I laid out these numbers for Jake, he agreed that they seemed reasonable but said he couldn't force Mark to contribute more than he was comfortable with. This conflict avoidance might seem like kindness, but it's actually enabling Mark to continue prioritizing his own comfort over family responsibilities. The irony is that Jake's attempts to avoid conflict with Mark have created much more serious conflict with me, conflict that threatens our marriage and, by extension, the entire family structure that everyone claims to want to preserve. His unwillingness to have difficult conversations with his brother has pushed us to the brink of divorce, which would actually make everyone's situation worse. If Jake and I divorce, I'll get primary custody of Emma and move to a smaller place that definitely won't have room for Robert and Linda. Jake will be paying child support and potentially alimony, reducing his ability to contribute to his parents' care. The current arrangement that everyone wants to maintain will become completely impossible, not just difficult. My therapist has suggested that Jake's conflict avoidance might be rooted in childhood patterns where keeping his parents happy was prioritized over everything else, including his own needs and boundaries. It sounds like Jake learned early that his job was to manage his parents' emotions and avoid upsetting them, she said. That's a heavy burden for a child to carry, and it can be hard to break those patterns as an adult. While I have some sympathy for Jake's psychological struggles with boundary setting, I'm also frustrated that he expects me to pay the price for his inability to have difficult conversations with his family. His childhood experiences might explain his behavior, but they don't excuse the fact that he's allowed his parents to take over our home and our lives while avoiding any responsibility for finding sustainable solutions. The guilt I feel about my ultimatum fluctuates between overwhelming and manageable depending on the day and my stress level. On bad days, I feel like a monster for threatening to break up a family and leave elderly people with limited options. On better days, I remember that I've already given 5 years of my life to this situation and that continuing indefinitely won't actually help anyone in the long run. My therapist has been helpful in reframing the guilt as a sign that I care about Robert and Linda's well-being, not evidence that I'm doing something wrong. Guilt can be useful when it tells us we've acted against our values, she said. But it can also be a sign that we're caring so much about others' needs that we're ignoring our own legitimate needs for safety, stability, and autonomy. She's also pointed out that my ultimatum might actually be the kindest thing for everyone involved, including Robert and Linda. Right now, they're living in a home where the primary caregiver is burned out, resentful, and having panic attacks, she said. That's not actually a stable or healthy environment for them either. Professional care might provide them with more consistency and specialized support than you're able to offer. The waiting period of my 90-day ultimatum has been excruciating. Jake continues the silent treatment, Linda has ramped up her passive-aggressive behavior, and Robert seems confused by the tension in the house, but unable to understand or address it. Emma keeps asking when things will go back to normal, and I don't have an answer for her. I've started making concrete plans for what happens if Jake doesn't meet my deadline. I've consulted with a divorce attorney, just an initial consultation to understand my options, researched apartments that would be suitable for Emma and me, and started thinking about how to rebuild my social life and sense of self after years of isolation. The attorney was straightforward about my situation. Given that Jake has been working full-time while I've been the primary caregiver, and given that the caregiving responsibilities have impacted my career advancement, I'd likely be entitled to primary custody of Emma and possibly some spousal support. The house would probably need to be sold, which would force a resolution to the Robert and Linda situation regardless. I don't want to get divorced. Despite everything that's happened, I still love Jake and believe we could rebuild our relationship if we could get back to being partners instead of co-managers of an impossible caregiving situation. But I also know that I can't continue living in crisis mode indefinitely, and that empty threats won't change anything. The research about apartments has been both depressing and liberating. Depressing because it represents the potential end of my marriage and the breakup of Emma's family structure. Liberating because it reminds me that there is life beyond this current situation, that I could have privacy and peace and control over my own environment again. I've been looking at 2-bedroom apartments in Emma's current school district, places where we could start fresh without the constant stress and conflict that have defined our lives for the past 5 years. The thought of coming home to a quiet, clean space where no one will criticize my cooking or rearrange my belongings is almost too appealing to contemplate. At the same time, I'm acutely aware that my potential fresh start would come at the cost of leaving Robert and Linda in a worse situation than they're in now. If Jake and I divorce, he'll be managing their care alone while dealing with the financial and emotional stress of a broken marriage. That knowledge makes it hard to feel entirely good about my exit strategy. But I'm also starting to understand that staying in an unsustainable situation to avoid difficult consequences for other people isn't actually helpful to anyone. The current arrangement is slowly destroying my mental health, my marriage, and my relationship with my daughter. Continuing it indefinitely won't make Robert and Linda's situation more stable. It will just delay the inevitable crisis while creating additional damage along the way. With 2 weeks left in my 90-day ultimatum, Jake finally broke his silence last night. He came into the bedroom after I'd gone to bed and sat on the edge of the mattress, looking exhausted and defeated. "I don't want to get divorced," he said quietly. "I love you and I love our family, and I don't want the situation to destroy everything we've built together." I sat up and looked at him, trying to gauge whether this was the beginning of a real conversation about solutions or just another attempt to get me to back down from my deadline without offering any concrete changes. "I don't want to get divorced either," I said. "But I also can't keep living like this. Something has to change, Jake. We can't just keep hoping that things will somehow get better on their own." Jake was quiet for a long time, and I could see him struggling with something. Finally, he said, "I've been avoiding dealing with this because I didn't want to admit that I can't take care of my own parents. It feels like failing as a son." That admission felt like the first honest thing Jake had said about this situation in years. His parents raised him to believe that family takes care of family no matter what, and admitting that we couldn't provide adequate care felt like betraying that fundamental value. "You're not failing as a son," I said gently. "You've been caring for your parents for 5 years, sacrificing your marriage and your own well-being to help them. But there's a difference between caring for someone and being able to provide professional-level care for complex medical and psychological needs." We talked for over an hour, the longest honest conversation we'd had in months. Jake finally acknowledged that Robert's cognitive issues were getting worse, that Linda's criticism and control were damaging our marriage, and that the current situation wasn't sustainable for anyone involved. He also admitted that he'd been hoping Mark would eventually step up with more substantial help, but that he was starting to realize that wasn't going to happen. "I keep thinking that if I just wait a little longer or explain the situation differently, Mark will realize how much we need his help," he said. "But he's not going to change, is he?" "Probably not," I agreed. "And we can't base our decisions on what Mark might do someday. We have to work with what's actually available, not what we wish were available." Jake asked if I'd be willing to extend my deadline if he committed to specific actions, meeting with social workers, applying for every possible assistance program, having direct conversations with Mark about financial contributions, and starting couples counseling to work on our relationship issues. I told him I'd consider it if he could show me concrete progress within the remaining 2 weeks. "I need to see that you're actually taking steps to change the situation, not just talking about taking steps," I said. This morning, Jake called 3 different elder care agencies to schedule assessments and consultation appointments. He also sent Mark a detailed email laying out the financial reality of Robert and Linda's care needs and asking for a specific monthly contribution rather than the vague, "I'll help however I can" promises Mark has been making. It's too early to know whether Jake's sudden burst of activity will lead to sustainable changes, or whether it's just panic-driven behavior that will fade once the immediate crisis passes. But for the first time in years, I feel like we might be moving toward actual solutions rather than just managing an impossible situation. I'm still prepared to follow through on my ultimatum if necessary. 5 years of disappointment and broken promises have taught me that good intentions aren't enough. I need to see sustained action and real progress. But I'm also hopeful that this crisis might finally force us to address problems we should have dealt with years ago. Whether our marriage survives this situation remains to be seen. But at least we're finally having honest conversations about what we can and can't provide, what we need from Jake's siblings, and what constitutes a reasonable long-term plan for everyone involved. The next 2 weeks will determine whether Jake's newfound motivation translates into meaningful change, or whether I'll be starting over as a single mother in a small apartment. Either way, I'm done sacrificing my mental health and my daughter's well-being to maintain an arrangement that isn't working for anyone. Update 1. Thank you all for the overwhelming response to my post. I've been reading through the comments whenever I can, and honestly, it's the first time in years that I've felt like I'm not completely crazy or unreasonable. So many of you have shared similar experiences or just validated that this situation has become completely unsustainable. Some people asked for an update on Jake's progress during the final 2 weeks of my ultimatum, so here's where things stand. Jake followed through on scheduling the elder care assessments. We've met with 2 social workers and learned about several programs and resources I didn't even know existed. Turns out there are more options available than we thought, but they require extensive paperwork, financial documentation, and waiting periods that Jake has been avoiding for years because he didn't want to invade his parents' privacy or treat them like charity cases. One social worker was pretty blunt with us. You've been trying to provide 24/7 care for 2 people with significant medical and cognitive needs, with no training, no respite, and no support system. That's not sustainable, and it's not actually in your in-laws' best interest either. They need professional care. Robert qualified for a specialized memory care program that has a sliding scale payment system based on income. It's not perfect, there's still a waiting list, and it's about 30 minutes away, but it's a real option with a realistic timeline. Linda could potentially qualify for assisted living with visiting nurse services, which would give her independence while ensuring she gets help with daily tasks. The most eye-opening part was learning that we've been making this much harder than it needed to be by trying to handle everything ourselves instead of working with the system. Families often think they're being noble by avoiding outside help, the social worker said, but you're actually doing everyone a disservice by not accessing available resources. Jake also finally had a direct conversation with Mark about money. Instead of vague requests for help, he sent a detailed breakdown of costs and asked for a specific monthly contribution of $800. Mark's response was predictably full of excuses, but he did agree to $400 per month, twice what he was contributing before, though still less than half of what would be proportional to his income. Even that increase helps significantly with the financial picture. Combined with the sliding scale programs and Emma's modest contributions, professional care is starting to look financially feasible rather than impossible. Linda found out about our meetings with social workers and has not spoken to me since. She's been giving me the complete silent treatment while making pointed comments to Emma about how some people don't appreciate family and how nowadays people just dump their elderly relatives instead of caring for them properly. Honestly, the silent treatment from Linda has been the most peaceful few days I've had in years. No criticism of my cooking, no rearranging of my kitchen, no commentary on my parenting or my appearance. I didn't realize how much mental energy I was spending preparing for her daily critiques until they stopped. Robert seems confused by the tension in the house, but not upset by it. His good days have actually been more frequent lately, maybe because there's less overall stress and conflict in the household when Linda isn't constantly criticizing everything. Jake and I started couples counseling last week. Our first session was rough. A lot of hurt feelings and accusations came spilling out, but it felt good to have a neutral third party help us navigate the conversation. The therapist immediately picked up on the dynamic where Jake avoids conflict and I absorb all the stress, and she's giving us tools to communicate more directly about problems instead of letting them fester. It sounds like you've both been trying to protect each other from difficult realities, she said. Jake, you've been protecting Sarah from the knowledge that there might not be good solutions for your parents. Sarah, you've been protecting Jake from the knowledge that you're drowning. But protection isn't the same as partnership. The biggest breakthrough was when Jake admitted that he's been terrified of his parents dying, and that keeping them close felt like a way to control that inevitable loss. I know it sounds stupid, he said, but I felt like if I could just take perfect care of them, maybe I could keep them safe and healthy forever. Understanding that his reluctance to explore outside care options came from grief and fear rather than just stubbornness made it easier for me to be compassionate about his resistance to change. It doesn't excuse the 5 years of putting all the burden on me, but it helps explain why someone who's normally reasonable became so inflexible about this one issue. Emma has been asking a lot of questions about what's happening with Grandma and Grandpa. I've been trying to be honest in age-appropriate ways, explaining that grown-ups sometimes need special help that families can't provide at home, and that we're looking for the best places for Grandma and Grandpa to get that help. She seemed relieved rather than upset when I explained that we might find a special place for them to live. Like how I go to school because you can't teach me everything at home? She asked. When I said yes, that was a good comparison, she nodded seriously and said, "That makes sense. Grandpa needs teachers who know about being confused, and Grandma needs teachers who know about arthritis. Kids are sometimes surprisingly wise about things adults make complicated." Update 2. It's been 6 weeks since my last update, and I wanted to share how things have progressed. The social worker helped us navigate the application process for Robert's memory care placement, and he was accepted into the program faster than expected. Someone else moved out of state, opening up a spot. He's been there for 3 weeks now, and the transformation has been remarkable. Robert is doing so much better in the structured environment. The memory care facility has routines and activities designed specifically for people with cognitive issues, and he's less confused and agitated than he's been in years. The staff knows how to redirect his paranoia and anxiety without taking it personally, and they have protocols for managing the behaviors that were so overwhelming for us to handle at home. When we visit, which Linda does almost daily, Robert seems genuinely happier. He's made friends with another resident who also loves Westerns, and they spend hours watching old movies together. The activities coordinator has gotten him involved in a woodworking program that taps into skills he had before the stroke. He's still confused about many things, but he's not frightened or angry most of the time. Linda was devastated when Robert first moved into the facility. She cried for 3 days straight and kept saying we were abandoning him and that he'd think we didn't love him anymore. But after seeing how well he's doing there, even she has to admit that he's getting better care than we could provide. "I still don't like it," she told me last week, the first time she'd spoken to me directly in over a month. "But I can see that he's not as scared all the time. And the nurses know what to do when he gets confused, instead of just getting upset like I did." That admission felt like a huge step forward in our relationship. Linda acknowledging that professional caregivers might be better equipped than family members was something I never thought I'd hear her say. Linda moved into a senior apartment complex 2 weeks ago. It's about 10 minutes from our house, so she's still close, but we all have our independence back. The apartment is small but nice, with grab bars and other accessibility features she needs. More importantly, it's part of a larger community with social activities and people her own age. She was resistant to the move at first, but the social worker helped us frame it as Robert needs memory care and Linda deserves her own space where she can make her own decisions and have some independence too. Focusing on it being about Linda's autonomy rather than us wanting her out of our house made it easier for her to accept. The senior community has a dining room where residents can eat together if they want social interaction, but Linda can also cook in her own kitchen when she prefers privacy. She's made friends with her neighbor, Mrs. Chun, who also has arthritis, and they've been sharing tips about managing pain and mobility issues. Linda still visits Robert every day and comes to our house for dinner twice a week, but it's by invitation rather than constant cohabitation. She's started expressing opinions about things other than our household management, talking about books she's reading and activities at the senior center. It's like she's rediscovered parts of her personality that got lost when she was focused on controlling our daily life. Jake's brother Mark finally stepped up in a meaningful way, though it took some family pressure to get there. Jake's sister Emma posted on Facebook about how proud she was of Jake for taking such good care of mom and dad, and mentioned specific details about the financial and emotional costs we'd been absorbing. Several family members responded with comments like, "We should all be helping with this," and "Mark, didn't you say you wanted to contribute more?" Apparently, the public nature of the discussion made it harder for Mark to continue making excuses. Mark called Jake the next day and agreed to contribute $600 monthly toward their parents' care, not the $800 Jake had asked for, but enough to make the math work with the sliding scale programs and Emma's contributions. He also agreed to take over managing their parents' medical insurance and Medicare paperwork, which has been a huge time-consuming burden for Jake. I think Mark was genuinely unaware of how much we'd been handling, partly because Jake had been protecting him from the details to avoid creating family drama. Once it became clear that the alternative to his increased contribution was Jake and Sarah getting divorced and the whole support system collapsing, Mark realized he needed to step up. The most important change has been in Jake's and my relationship. We're still in couples counseling, and we're slowly rebuilding trust and partnership. Jake has acknowledged how unfair the past 5 years have been to me and Emma, and he's been working hard to prioritize our marriage instead of just assuming I'll handle whatever crisis comes up. "I think I was so afraid of disappointing my parents that I ended up disappointing my wife instead," he said during one of our counseling sessions. "I thought if I could just be the perfect son, everything else would work itself out. But you can't have a marriage where one person sacrifices everything and the other person just accepts that as normal." We've established new boundaries about family obligations and decision-making. Major decisions that affect our household get discussed between Jake and me first, before involving extended family. We've agreed on limits for how much time and money we can reasonably contribute to elder care without damaging our own family's well-being. Emma is back to being her happy, confident self. She started having sleepovers again, and her teacher says she seems much more relaxed and focused at school. She still loves her grandparents, but now she sees them during specific visits rather than living in a constant state of tension and unpredictability. Our house feels like a home again instead of a crisis management center. Jake and I can have private conversations without interruption. We've rediscovered physical intimacy, nothing earth-shattering, but we're rebuilding that connection slowly. I can come home from work without bracing myself for criticism or conflict. I still feel some guilt about how everything played out, but my therapist reminds me that guilt isn't always a reliable indicator of wrongdoing. "You feel guilty because you care about Robert and Linda's well-being," she says. "But caring about them doesn't mean you are obligated to sacrifice your own well-being indefinitely." She's also pointed out that the outcomes have actually been better for everyone involved. Robert is getting specialized care that's improved his quality of life. Linda has independence and social connections she didn't have when she was focused on managing our household. Jake and I are rebuilding our marriage instead of letting it dissolve under caregiver stress. Emma is growing up in a stable, peaceful environment. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is recognize when a situation isn't working and advocate for change, my therapist said. Professional care is an abandonment. It's often the most responsible choice when family resources are overwhelmed. To anyone reading this who's in a similar situation, you're not selfish for having limits. You can't set yourself on fire to keep others warm, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do for everyone involved is to find appropriate solutions instead of just enduring until you break. Caregiving is supposed to be temporary and sustainable, with clear boundaries and support systems. If you're providing 24/7 care with no respite, no training, and no end date, that's not actually helping anyone in the long run. It took me 5 years and the threat of divorce to learn that lesson, but I hope others can recognize the warning signs earlier and seek appropriate help before reaching a crisis point. Final update, 6 months later. I wanted to provide one final update for everyone who's been following this situation, because I know a lot of people were invested in how everything turned out. It's now been 6 months since Robert moved into memory care and Linda moved into her senior apartment, and I can honestly say that this has been the best outcome for everyone involved. Robert has continued to thrive in the structured environment of the memory care facility. His confusion and agitation episodes are much less frequent, and when they do occur, The trained staff know how to handle them without trauma or drama. He's gained weight. He'd been losing weight at our house due to paranoia about food. He's sleeping better, and he's engaged in activities that give him purpose and social connection. The most telling indicator of how well Robert is doing came last month when Linda asked if he could come home for a weekend visit. The memory care staff explained that disrupting his routine might be confusing and distressing for him and suggested a longer visit at the facility instead. When we spent a Saturday afternoon there, Robert was clearly comfortable and happy in his environment. He showed us around like he was proud of his new home, introduced us to his friends, and seemed content in a way he hadn't been in years. Linda has transformed in ways I never expected. Living independently has given her back a sense of autonomy and purpose that she'd lost when she was focused on managing our household. She's become active in the senior center, joined a book club, and started volunteering with a literacy program for elderly immigrants. The most surprising development is that Linda has started dating. She met a widower named Frank at the senior center, and they've been going to movies and community events together. She actually asked me for advice about whether it was appropriate for her to have a boyfriend at her age, and we had the most normal, friendly conversation we'd had in years. "I know I was difficult when I lived with you," she admitted during that conversation. "I felt so useless and scared about everything changing. Taking over your kitchen and criticizing everything was probably my way of trying to feel needed and in control. I'm sorry I made things so hard for you and Jake." That apology meant everything to me. It acknowledged that the problems hadn't all been in my head or due to my inability to be grateful enough. Linda's recognition that her behavior had been difficult and her understanding of why it happened has allowed us to rebuild a relationship based on mutual respect rather than constant conflict. Linda still comes to our house for dinner once a week, and we visit her apartment occasionally, but these interactions happen because we want to see each other, not because we're trapped together in an unsustainable living situation. She's back to being the sweet, thoughtful person I remember from early in my marriage, and I genuinely enjoy spending time with her now. Jake and I are still in counseling, but we've made tremendous progress in rebuilding our partnership. He's learned to communicate more directly about problems instead of hoping they'll resolve themselves, and I've learned to express my needs and boundaries clearly instead of just absorbing stress until I explode. "I think we're better partners now than we were before all this started," Jake said recently. "We know we can survive really difficult situations and still choose each other. And we know how to ask for help instead of just trying to handle everything ourselves." We've also established much healthier boundaries with extended family. When Jake's Aunt Patricia tried to guilt us about putting Robert in a home, Jake responded directly, "Robert is getting professional care that's improved his quality of life. Mom has her independence back, and my marriage is stronger." These were good decisions that have worked out well for everyone. Mark has continued to contribute the agreed-upon $600 monthly and has taken over managing the insurance paperwork as promised. More importantly, he started visiting his parents regularly instead of just sending money from a distance. His kids have gotten to know their grandparents in ways that weren't possible when Robert was confused and Linda was stressed all the time. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten," Mark told Jake during a recent visit. "When I saw them at your house, they always seemed fine during my short visits. I didn't understand that you and Sarah were managing crisis situations constantly. I'm sorry it took me so long to step up with real help." Emma has blossomed in ways that remind me of who she was before the caregiving situation took over our lives. She's confident, social, and secure in her relationships. She talks about grandma and grandpa with affection but not anxiety, and she seems to understand that they're in places where they can get the help they need. "I'm glad Grandpa isn't scared anymore," she told me recently. "And I'm glad Grandma has friends her own age instead of just us. It's better when grown-ups have other grown-ups to talk to about grown-up things." Once again, the wisdom of children cuts right to the heart of complex adult situations. My own healing process has been gradual but significant. The panic attacks stopped completely once Robert and Linda moved out, and our household returned to a manageable size. I've rebuilt relationships with friends who had drifted away during the caregiving years. I've rediscovered hobbies and interests that had been pushed aside by constant crisis management. Most importantly, I've learned to recognize and communicate my own limits before they become ultimatums. When Jake's cousin asked if we could provide temporary housing for her elderly mother-in-law last month, I was able to say kindly but firmly, "We're not in a position to provide live-in care for elderly relatives, but we'd be happy to help you research other options." Jake supported my boundary setting completely, and we spent an afternoon helping his cousin navigate the same social services and programs that had been so helpful for Robert and Linda. It felt good to share resources and knowledge instead of just absorbing other people's caregiving crises. The financial impact of the changes has been overwhelmingly positive. Even with contributing to Robert and Linda's care costs, our household expenses have decreased significantly. Our grocery bills are back to normal, our utilities are lower, and we're not constantly buying medical equipment and home modifications. More importantly, I've been able to focus on my career again. I got a promotion at work that would have been impossible when I was managing constant caregiving emergencies. The increased income has more than offset our contributions to Robert and Linda's care, and we're finally able to save money for Emma's education and our own retirement. Looking back on the 5 years of in-home caregiving, I can see both the mistakes we made and the love that motivated them. We took on responsibilities we weren't trained or equipped to handle because we genuinely wanted to help people we loved. But good intentions weren't enough to make an unsustainable situation work, and our attempts to handle everything ourselves actually delayed better solutions for everyone. The social workers were right. Families often think they're being noble by avoiding outside help, but we were actually doing everyone a disservice by not accessing available resources. Professional care isn't a failure of family love. It's often the most loving choice when family resources are overwhelmed. For anyone currently struggling with similar situations, here are the key lessons I learned. Seek professional help early, before you reach a crisis point. Social workers, elder care specialists, and family counselors have training and resources that families typically don't have. Using these resources isn't giving up, it's getting the right tools for a complex job. Be honest about what you can and can't sustainably provide. Caregiving that destroys the caregiver's health, marriage, or financial stability isn't actually helping anyone in the long run. Don't enable family members who aren't contributing proportionally. If someone has the resources to help but chooses not to, accepting their excuses just shifts the burden to people who are already overextended. Professional care often provides better outcomes than well-meaning family care. Trained professionals have the knowledge, experience, and emotional distance to provide appropriate care without the guilt, resentment, and boundary issues that can complicate family caregiving. Children are affected by household stress more than adults often realize. Emma's nightmares, anxiety, and reluctance to bring friends home were all signs that our caregiving situation was impacting her development and sense of security. Marriage and family relationships require active protection and maintenance, especially during stressful periods. Jake and I almost lost our marriage because we stopped prioritizing our partnership in favor of crisis management. Ultimatums shouldn't be threats. They should be clear statements of what you need to remain in a relationship or situation. My 90-day deadline wasn't manipulation. It was honest communication about my limits and needs. I still sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd given Jake's family more time, or tried harder to make the in-home caregiving work, or been more patient with Linda's criticisms and Robert's episodes. But my therapist reminds me that what if questions aren't helpful when the actual outcomes have been positive for everyone involved? Robert is healthier and happier. Linda has independence and social connections. Jake and I have a stronger marriage. Emma is growing up in a stable, peaceful environment. Mark has stepped up as a more involved son. The extended family has learned that real support involves action, not just opinions about what other people should be doing. To everyone who supported me through the comments and messages, thank you for helping me realize that I wasn't crazy, selfish, or ungrateful for having limits. Your stories, advice, and validation gave me the courage to stand firm on boundaries that ultimately benefited everyone involved. Marriage is about partnership, not endless sacrifice by one person. Family means caring for each other in sustainable ways, not enabling unsustainable situations because change feels scary. Professional care is often the most loving option when family resources are overwhelmed. It took me 5 years and the threat of divorce to learn these lessons, but I hope sharing my experience helps others recognize these truths earlier in their own caregiving journeys. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is acknowledge when a situation isn't working and advocate for change, even when that change feels scary or difficult. Professional solutions aren't failure or abandonment. They're often the pathway to better outcomes for everyone involved.